welcome everybody out to our mics are on if you need them on. I'd like to welcome everybody out to the August 4th, 2021 North Ogden City Planning Commission meeting being held physically at our city building as well as on Zoom. Chairman Thomas, I'll be conducting tonight, and we'll begin with a invocation or thought from Vice Chairman Mason, followed which being led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Webb.
Thank you. Tonight, in lieu of an invocation, I would like to share a thought instead. And I found this from the internet, so this is from an anonymous author, and it says, "Excellence is never an accident. It is the result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities." And to that, I would like to add a testament that, we are planning for not just what's good for us today, but we need to really look into the future and see what's good for this community into the future. And I think the nature of what we do is obstacles in land development and land usage. And I would love for us to be able to see those obstacles as opportunities. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're supposed to like walk up front or something. And salute.
All right, thank you. We'll make note that all commissioners are in attendance here tonight. Is there anybody on Zoom?
Maybe, no, sorry. Should I grab it? There is one person. So yes, there is, but they don't have their hand raised or anything.
Well, our opening meeting statement, we don't have any agenda items, so it's just discussion, so we'll forego that meeting statement. Therefore, no voting items, forego the ex parte communications. Public comments, item number 4. If anybody would like to make a public comment to the Planning Commission, please do so this time. If you're on Zoom, you raise your hand or type a chat. We'd love to hear from you.
Nothing yet.
Okay. If there's no comment, we'll move to our discussion and training items. The only item on tonight's agenda is a training item. Item number 5. What hat do you wear? How do you make informed decisions on land use issues? Land Use Academy of Utah video series by Brent Bateman.
I'll just make a few comments. So thank you all for coming and attending tonight. I really appreciate it. This will count as 1 hour of the 4 hours required training before the end of this calendar year. And I'm trying to put together just a whole series of trainings so that I have them ready to go and I don't have to dig something up. But this video series I think is really good. It's 3 very short videos posted by Brent Bateman from the Land Ombudsman's office. It's from 2016, so it feels a little dated in some ways. Like there's a guy holding a smartphone and it's little and like one camera on it and it's already looking out of date. But it's well done. It's all very local government focused and focused specifically on what you do. And we're going to have a few facilitated conversation questions, make sure that we do hit the hour and ask you for your feedback. But I have a few questions and we are going to ask for feedback from every one of you. So we're going to play teacher rules where everybody has to participate and everyone has to say something. But we're going to do a name that decision type. So as a planning commission member, before you've watched the videos now, you wear a handful of different hats. And we try to put these on the staff reports, but I'm just interested to know. So for a rezone, what kind of decision type is that? Legislative. Legislative. That was correct. Okay. Now a site plan review.
Administrative.
Okay, administrative. How about a conditional use permit?
Legislative.
Administrative. So while you're
just have to send that to the
while you're thinking about what conditions you would impose. Conditional use permits should be thought of as permitted uses that have conditions on them. The next one. A variance or a special exception. If you can come up with the word. for this.
Legislative.
It's a form of legislative, but it's called, Brent calls them quasi, but I'd say quasi-judicial. So you're interpreting the law when you're doing a special exemption or variance. Okay, two more. How about a general plan amendment? Legislative, and then developing new code language. With that, I think we'll just conclude the training and
There you
ask
go.
for a motion to.
I don't know if there's only two choices.
All right, so that's very good. It's good to think about those decision types as you're sitting there because it really helps you focus your mind on what type of decision you are, and it helps separate too the difference between a public hearing item and a public meeting. So every meeting that we do is a public meeting. The public is welcome to come. They're welcome to provide comments on like item number 4. But we'll talk a little bit later about when you have public pressure or potentially public clamor and how that can impact your decision making on the other side, depending on what types of decisions that you're making. So as we start this, and John, if you'll pull it up, there's 3 different, if you pull up that link I sent, there's 3 videos. Question that I'd have you keep in mind, and we'll talk about at the end of this, I think the first one's just about 8 minutes long, is what's one new thing you learned? So we'll talk about in each of these videos if you learned something new or maybe something surprising that came out of the videos. And with that, we'll go ahead and start.
Okay, let me just switch my screen share. Okay.
Or a local government official. If you're involved in making land use or zoning decisions, or if you work with those folks, what we're going to talk about today is the 3 most important things that you need to know. The decisions you make must be understood and handled correctly, or else you may violate someone's property rights or lose a lawsuit. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Bateman. I'm lead attorney in the Office of Property Rights Ombudsman. And today we're going to be discussing what I think are the most important and fundamental aspects of land use decision making. The difference between a legislative decision, an administrative decision, and a quasi-judicial decision. If you are a city council person or a county commissioner, if you're a planning commissioner or staff, or if any of your duties in any way involve making land use or zoning decisions in your community, every decision you make is one of these 3. But these decisions are all made differently. They have different rules, and most importantly, different effects. You know, the vast majority of local government officials that I know, they want to do the right thing. They want to follow the law. They want to protect people's property rights, and they want to make the best decisions for their community. Unless you're evil, we're talking about you. Understanding our discussion today is the key to doing that. In my opinion, knowing what type of decision you make is the first step in making the best decision. If you will remember your high school civics class, in America and in Utah, we have 3 branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch, which consists of our elected Congress. Their job is to take policy and make law. The executive branch, consisting of the president or governor, their job is to take the laws and enforce them. The judicial branch's job is to determine what the law is. Hopefully they're very smart, and their job is to interpret the law in case there's some kind of dispute. Locally, in your city or county, the same 3 roles exist, although they may be organized a little differently. There is a legislative branch of local government. Their job is to take policy, what the citizens in the community would like to see in their community, and to turn that into law. Those are local ordinances. The administrative role arises after the law is made, and it applies the law to different individuals or circumstances. For example, if a land use application is made, the administrative role is to apply the existing land use law to that application. And the quasi-judicial role is interpreting the local laws when there is a dispute. So let's talk for a second about each one individually and how it works locally. First, legislative. A legislative decision makes law. A legislative body does this by discussing widely applicable policy considerations and formulating laws to enforce those policies. What would we like to see in our community? Let's make a law to make that happen. Examples of legislative decisions include changing the general plan, adopting or amending ordinances, or annexation. Each local government has one body and only one body with authority to do this: the city council, town council, county council, and commission. No one else. And the standard of review is reasonably debatable that it advances the purposes of Ludma. That's a low standard. A decision need only be reasonably debatable that it is good for the local community and it will be upheld. Next, an administrative decision. An administrative decision applies the law. There are no policy considerations in an administrative decision. There's no, is this a good idea, or does this work here? Those decisions have already been made and placed in the local code. An administrative decision takes an application and applies the existing law to it. Examples include subdivision or a conditional use permit or a building permit. An administrative decision can be made by any party that the legislative body appoints. Many administrative decisions are made by staff. Sometimes they are made by a planning commission, but they do not have to be. They can be made by any party appointed to the task. And the standard of review is substantial evidence on the record. If an administrative decision is supported by substantial evidence, it will be upheld. And finally, the quasi-judicial decision. A quasi-judicial decision comes into play in the case of a dispute, and it interprets the law. Every local government must appoint a person or body to handle this role, called a local appeal authority. Many places use boards of adjustment for this role, but that is not required. That's a quick overview of the three types of decisions and the differences between them. There are a lot of nuances we haven't discussed, but that's okay. This is enough to get started. Every time you make a land use decision, you have to think about the type of decision it is. Every time. If you'll do that, you'll greatly increase your likelihood of making the best decision. And hey, if you're going to make the best decision, hats off to you.
Okay, so there's two more that we'll go through. But let's talk just a little bit about that. So 3 hats that you wear, 3 different types of decision-making for planning commission. What is something new or interesting or that you learned?
I like the fact I thought it was really good on this differentiating between administrative and legislative, because it always confusing at times. And the examples on that made it real clear. It kind of cleared up some confusion with pointing out the quasi stuff. That's brings a lot to how do you interpret things. I think that's where you get in trouble.
I've never heard this term reasonably debatable before. That's kind of interesting. Whatever that is. Something.
It makes sense, but I've never thought about that there's one and only one body that can make legislative decisions.
I thought it was interesting that they can appoint anybody to make an administrative decision. I didn't know that was a thing. They said it could be staff, commission, or anybody they appoint. So.
It made me think about, and this is probably just because I'm new, the times that we have discussion amongst the planning commission based on whether it's one of those 3 categories. It just made me wonder, should that debate sound different, or is this a open forum that regardless of the decision, it's a public comment, and so there are times that it's okay if it crosses over. It made me think of my actions and am I being efficient?
That's a great comment to think about. What should the structure of the discussion look like as we get to part 2 and part 3 of the video series, because they talk about the public comment section. So that's a really good one to keep in mind.
And for me, it was just be honest, I've never really clearly understood the legislative and administrative. Breaking it down to simply the legislative makes or changes laws and administrative administers those laws makes that a lot more simple.
Right. And you guys as the planning commission, you have really, this is your interaction with the city to a large degree, unless you come and you attend city council meetings or you're really, tuned into the development decisions that are happening out there. So I don't even know if I'd really expect you to have this answer right off the top of your head, but do you know who or what is the city's appeal authority? So an appeal to your decisions, do you know where that goes?
For the hearing officer?
Is it still your dad?
Would it be you?
No.
No, it is the hearing officer.
Yep, so we use a hearing officer. So at the time that this video was presented, Board of Adjustments were still an active thing. They might still be, they're sort of a relic of the past in some ways. City councils often used to be identified as Board of Adjustments or as the appeal authority. That's a practice that's really been shied away from lately. So we have a third-party appeal authority that is paid a set fee for those appeals to be heard. We have Meg Ryan, she works for Utah League of Cities and Towns. I think does an excellent job. It can be retired, you've got retired judges, you have people who have been on city council for a long time who understand these things. There's a variety of backgrounds, but it's just this thought that you have one identified path for the appeals, and that's the due process of law. So a decision here, if you were to deny an administrative decision, you would have to make sure that that was, I wrote the term down in my phone so that I don't screw it up, but if substantial evidence on the record, if you didn't feel like there was substantial evidence on the record, you denied a site plan review for whatever reason, it didn't meet muster, they could appeal that decision from you to the appeal authority. The appeal authority would then review the evidence on the record that was submitted to you and whether there was an error in judgment. And that can then be referred back to the planning commission to be reheard, or it could be upheld, denied. That decision could be, and then there's, you just start running that forward through the process. So if they wanted to appeal the appeal authority's decision, then it goes into district court, and then you can run these sorts of land use decisions up the tree. So that's why it's really important that you understand whether you're making one of those debatable legislative recommendations to the city council that can be a wide variety of information, or whether it's truly just administering the code as it's written today. And if you don't like the way the code is written today, then you still administer it as it is, but you would then make recommendations that we need to change, amend, or make policy modifications to these sections of code.
When's the last time that happened in North Arkansas City, that it went to an appeal authority and even the owner?
I denied a building permit application right when I got here on the basis of the house being too tall on an uphill lot. And so that was, it could have come in as a variance request, but it turned out that, well, it was an appeal to my decision that ultimately ended up as a variance. So variances are heard by the same person. And it was determined in that case that 2 lots of the Cove subdivision had unique enough geography that it required the base level of the home, like where the foundation is going to be leveled, to be higher than our standard house height would be from the top back of curb. So it's an I made an administrative interpretation, not an administrative interpretation. I administered the code as I read it, denied the decision, denied this building permit, and then they requested a variance from the law, basically. So that happened. It's pretty rare. We don't do a whole lot of variances. We don't do a lot of appeals. John?
I don't remember the last time one went from the planning commission to a hearing officer.
It's been 3 years. But most of them, and that's actually part of the reason that groups have moved away from Board of Adjustments, is that if they hear them so infrequently, then basically every time you go to have a hearing, you have to retrain the whole Board of Adjustment on the rules, as opposed to picking someone who in one way or another has either done that full-time, part-time, and understands all the nuances of Utah law. That most cities are moving towards that hearing officer. A couple of them are moving to, they've got a panel. They might have 3 professionals depending on it, or they have a rotation. So it's not always the same hearing officer. It's kind of a luck of the draw. Eric mentioned my dad does it. for a few communities. Because he is, was a land use attorney for
Yeah.
a while, so.
And that keeps your Board of Adjustment isn't your citizens, it's not your neighbors, it's not someone you're gonna run into in the grocery store that's having to weigh these decisions. It's an independent third party that can just review the law and apply their decision.
So, I guess in my mind, I'm trying to differentiate between, sometimes people will come here and they'll testify, they don't like what's being discussed, and they say, well, we're gonna sue the city, or we're gonna bring a lawsuit or something. I'm trying to think in those instances, it doesn't seem like it was that kind of a process, but maybe it was because the city was the applicant. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So the one that we had most recently
Like
were
the
some people.
amphitheater or something like
Well,
that.
so there was a group home up the hill where we had
Right.
people come and say, hey, our HOA prohibits this.
Right.
We're going to sue the city. They didn't. In talking with those individuals, I recommend they talk to a land use attorney, and ultimately they found that it was the federal law they were up against, not the city law. But it does happen in our community. In all honesty, it doesn't happen as much, partly because of the way this group handles themselves. One of the things that comes from the bench, right? That's what we're calling it. Quite often is just acknowledging that you're hearing what they're saying. So many cities have this issue where everyone on this side of the whatever this would be called, sits there silently, doesn't communicate, and then they just vote immediately without talking through the issues. And this group does a real good job of saying, hey, I understand what you're saying, but we are tied by these rules, or here's the way to work through it. And so we've actually been pretty lucky in
Right.
basically, if people leave here understanding and feeling better about the process, even if it didn't go their way.
If it didn't go their way and they want to sue somebody or whatever, do they go through this hearing officer process first and then move on from there generally?
So it's a form of mediation, essentially.
And usually, I think most of the time when those come up, most of all that is really when it boils down to legislative, because it's pretty easy for an applicant to understand, this is the law, we can't change this. There's the variance process, and those are minor things, but it's usually somebody's got their heart set on something. They need a rezone, they need this, and so it's that legislative thing. And that's the thing that's always, when you look and say, what's black and white, or an emotional decision and not, those legislative ones are the ones that tend to, can be the emotional side, because, they're quite frankly, like when it comes to rezoning, there doesn't have to be a reason for the city council to deny us all rezone. Like they don't, if they just don't like it, they don't, hey, I don't want to do it. They have the right to vote that way. And that's what causes some of those issues sometimes. But, it's interesting because for us making the administrative decision, I think one key thing that's good about our body is we give everybody a chance to speak, even though it's not a public hearing every time there's an item. But also, giving credit to the developers and those that do come to our city is the reasons we don't have those issues is because usually the developer's willing to amend their design or their plan to accommodate some of the things the neighbor or somebody doesn't like.
Yeah.
I don't know a time where we've had a developer stand in front of us and say, this is the law, I meet the law, you have to pass it. I don't care if everybody hates it.
No, I can every time.
They're always, usually willing to adjust something. And sometimes it might be a road or
You know the
something.
one I'm talking
I can
about.
think of a time.
Yeah.
But
Got an airful.
But those are pretty rare.
Hmm?
Those are pretty rare.
Yeah. But at the same time, and that's what helps avoid those things. It's really, people willing to work, if the staff or us, in a subdivision per se, hey, we'd really like a road about right here. They don't have to change their design and say, no, I'm putting it here. I meet the requirements. This is what I'm doing. Usually everybody's pretty workable. And so that avoids those conflicts and those issues. And, sometimes there's nothing you can do, but
I think to that point too, it's really hard for people to understand shared resources. It's a lot easier for people to see, well, this is mine, this is what I'm gonna do, and that's the law. But in reality, a lot of the things that we're looking at are to some degree a shared resource. And having policy that helps to define how to be good neighbors with one another does also, I think, require on the other side some understanding and some time. And it's, you know, the short time that I've been here, I think it's neat that people stay late, that people allow conversation, that Mace throws it out there and, you know, lets people like bat it around and, you know, puts his thoughts out. And I think that's courageous. It's admirable.
Or dumb.
Well, it kind of goes back to what you were saying is Commissioner Mason is very good at like throwing that last discussion point out there for the public to know that we have heard everything that they've said to us, and we are taking all that into consideration. I think you're particularly good at that, so I appreciate that.
Can that be on the public record? Is this being recorded?
It's on YouTube. You can watch it
You're-
later.
you're making-
Oh, we have one audience. Whoever you are, I hope you heard that.
So I had just one last one. I won't drag this out, but in a legislative decision, is it also the same appeal authority to this hearing officer, or is it completely different?
No, so the first appeal for, in the instance of a rezone that has been recommended for denial, it's not an appeal to your decision. It's that decision has its due process to move forward to the city council with a recommendation from denial of planning commission. Staff can, you know, I can have my professional opinion, you can have your denial, and then the council is left to weigh that decision. And that's where he says the bar is reasonably debatable. And that's an extremely low bar, because you can get two very reasonable people in a room and debate the pluses and the minuses of increased intensity, density of commercial in this location versus residential. And so that's where you have broad latitude as the city council and the legislative authority. And then from there, if it were denied, then it could be up to, where would a rezone denial go past the city council, John?
So it would go straight to district court.
Skip the hearing officer altogether.
Right. So legislative goes straight to district court, then would go to Court of Appeals, then would go to the Supreme Court. For your stuff, that's the administrative, it goes hearing officer, district court, and then it skips the Court of Appeals and would have to go straight to Supreme Court after district court.
So what about this situation? This may be a little off topic,
I'll look that
but
up.
you know, a resident comes in and says, hey, I don't like the barn that my next door neighbor built, and I think it violates the, you know, it's too close to the property line or whatever. I mean, they come to us, like, we have no answer for that, right? Like, what is the answer we should give them? Because I wanted to say, well, we'll sue your neighbor.
Yeah, there's nuisance law takes care of a number of issues, but in that case, the correct answer or the right path would be to have that person, refer that person to the building official and or city staff, who would then send an inspector out to that property, inspect the location of that ancillary structure or whatever it is, shed, barn, and then make a call. And we actually have one of those right now. And I asked one of our inspectors, what have you done in the past? And he said, we have told people to tear that down or move it or make it comply, or you have to abate it.
But does it become a civil, you know?
It can
item between the two
if
neighbors?
it's not something that is clear in the code and we have legislation for. So like your neighbor's tree is blowing sticks and leaves and crap all over your yard. We don't really have a code that disallows a tree planted at or near property line that's impacting its neighbor. So that would be nuisance law. And there's been a lot of law that has been brought out of nuisance law. Spike fences are one. I mean, really one of the reasons that you have strictly codified fence regulations is clear sight triangles for visibility for pedestrians and auto crashes. And the fact that when you really hate your neighbor, you might build an obnoxious 15-foot tall fence 8 feet from their house and block light and all sorts of things from them. So that spike law is like a whole section of land use law that came out of nuisances.
But Scott, I think one of the things you're saying is that the neighbor can choose to make it an issue in civil court, even if the city reads the code, says we don't see an issue, that the neighbor has the right to take it to court and make an issue and say, the city's not taking action on this, but this is affecting me and I have this issue with my neighbor and think that this part of the city code prohibits this. So the city doesn't have to be the only person or entity to try and enforce city code. And on one of the points that you made about the question you asked, the way you phrased it was really interesting. You said, I don't like, the neighbor comes and says, I don't like this decision, or sorry, this structure. I don't think it meets the code. I think that's really interesting because I wouldn't underestimate the role of the planning commission in helping the neighbor and for any project on an administrative item to understand that there's a difference between I don't like something and it doesn't meet the city code. That, you know, that's a lot of the reason why we're having the training, because they don't understand on administrative issues that you don't like it. If they're just talking about they don't like it, that's a term called public clamor, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But we have to help divest them of inaccurate expectations that, you know, your opinions carry weight to the degree that they make an argument that the code is not being met, not, I just don't happen to like this structure.
Yeah. Well, what about something that isn't, we have, you know, policy for it, or whatever the right word is, you know, code stuff for it, but because it's been enacted and there were a lot of let's use light, for example, a lot of floodlights out there in North Ogden. People don't, you know, there's some ambiguity around light pollution, you know, oh, it's safety to have this or whatever, but it's, you know, from the church and it's going right down into my backyard. What's a better way to address something like that there's real public misunderstanding about, and how do you start to stem the tide? Because if you send a nuisance officer out to every issue, it's just going to piss people off, you know, and we're not going to stem the tide. So what's a common sense approach to something like that?
Well, if you had something like that, you've got a community like ours that's changed in some ways from rural feel to like urban emerging feel, you probably have some percentage of the population that views that light population or that light pollution as an issue, right? So now would be the time to have that public discussion about a code requiring development from this point forward to have light shielding and, you know, all of those block the light, that sort of thing. And you can kind of enact it from today forward. It's like sins of the past. We can't really fix those. We can't force on somebody. If they make a change, if they come in for a site plan review and they have lights that are out of compliance, you could say now is our opportunity to bring this into compliance through the new code that we've done. But until they bring forward a land use application, you're kind of stuck with it. And again, if it's really super obnoxious, your neighbor put up a Nest camera and a spotlight that spotlights your backyard and you have a hot tub, I sue them. I mean, that's a nuisance claim. It's a privacy, you know, privacy rights thing. So that's where nuisance law and or your ability to, you know, sue your neighbor comes into play and help take care of those onesie-twosie issues.
Okay, thank you.
So let's start video 2. So thank you for the discussion. It was really helpful. I actually texted Brandon, we're gonna need more questions, but I don't think we will. But we'll
He doesn't
watch
know us good.
part
Doesn't
2.
know us very well yet.
Okay, we're gonna have to watch a ad, I guess. Well,
Then you can skip it.
yeah. I'll skip it, unmute it.
The best decision. And hey, if you're gonna make the best decision, hats off to you.
Now, that was interesting. Yeah, informative.
So what do we do now, Ombudsman?
It's got too much time on it.
I thought the first one was low
Hello
budget.
again, everyone. Welcome to What Hat Do You Wear Part 2. I'm Brent Bateman, your friendly neighborhood ombudsman. If you watched part 1 of this video, you remember that we talked about the 3 hats that local government officials wear. They have a legislative role, an administrative role, and a quasi-judicial role. The legislative role makes the law, an administrative role applies the law, and a quasi-judicial role interprets the law. Well, today in part 2, we want to explain how to apply these concepts to the real-life work of local government. So, we've come here to City Hall to talk about planning commissions. But wait, put away that remote control. Even if you are not a planning commissioner, this information is for you. It's meant for council persons and mayors and city staff and property owners and developers. Knowing the planning commission's role and how it relates to the 3 hats will help us clarify the whole land use process for everyone. Also, let's set our quasi-judicial hat aside for now. The local quasi-judicial role belongs to your local appeal authority. That's another subject entirely, and it will require a video of its own, coming soon. Quickly, let's review. A legislative decision makes law. An administrative decision applies the law. A legislative decision could be a zoning change, an ordinance amendment, or a general plan amendment. An administrative decision applies the zoning to an application, like an application for a conditional use permit, subdivision approval, or building permit. A legislative decision can only be made by the legislative body, the city council. An administrative decision is made by whomever the city council appoints. So, knowing this, what is the planning commission's role? Is it legislative? Is it administrative? What exactly is the planning commission supposed to do? The planning commission's first and most important job is revealed in the name. It's called the planning commission. Its job is to plan, to make a plan for land use in the community that reflects what the community wants to be. Welcome to the planning commission meeting, folks. We're all very fortunate to serve our beautiful town of St. Bernard, Utah, and we're here to make a plan. So, what's our plan? What do we want our community to be?
I think we should have a mix of uses in town. So commercial is fine by the highway if we must, but I will only agree to farms and large lots over by Vamoose Creek.
We've got to keep the industrial areas over by Migrate Canyon.
And what should we do in Connect Hollow? I think a golf course.
Could we zone for a KFC right next to my house? I'm hungry a lot.
Thank you. Great plan. You guys are all kooks. Utah law states that the planning commission's duty is to make a general plan or amendments to a general plan and recommend that plan or amendments to the city council. That plan is the commission's recommendation for what the community should be. That is an ongoing process, and it takes work, and it takes time, and it takes care. We have other videos that talk about the general plan and how to make a good one. For now, we need to know that this duty to plan represents one part of a planning commission's legislative role. The planning commission is helping to make the law. Now, the planning commission's next role after planning is to make recommendations to the city council regarding zoning and land use ordinance changes. This is also a legislative role. Zoning decisions and amending the code make the law. The planning commission's job is to discuss, consider, draft, and recommend to the council land use regulations and amendments. Okay, welcome to planning commission meeting. Today, folks, we have an application from a Mr. Howard Wheelmaker, who would like to change the zoning on his property. He would like to change the use from an ice cream shop to an outdoor shooting range.
And that will require a zoning change from the CF commercial fund zone to the CD commercial debt zone.
Do we really want that outdoor shooting range there? That property's address is on Kids Play in the Road Avenue.
I knew we would regret naming that. Well, let's hear what the public has to say. They always make sense.
Sound familiar? Well, that's the legislative process. Discussing, considering, and drafting land use regulations is, like planning, so important that the local legislative body, the city council or the county commission, cannot by law adopt or amend a land use regulation without first receiving a recommendation from the planning commission. And also, like planning, this is an ongoing process. It is a constant effort to refine a city code, to always make it better, clearer, easier, and compliant with the ever-changing state law. If this is done correctly, the planning commission should spend most of its time on these legislative goals. Refining and changing the plan and ordinances, even for the smallest towns, is a process that cannot be neglected. And finally, the planning commission's role may be to make administrative decisions. Administrative decisions do not change the law, but they apply it to individual land use applications, such as a conditional use application or a subdivision approval. The planning commission has this role only if the city council has appointed it to them. Staff can also fill this role. It is up to the legislative body to decide what works best in your own area. Okay, folks, our last item on the agenda today. We have an application from our old friend Cletus McPoodleface, who would like a conditional use permit to open a commercial dog kennel.
That's in the middle of the RO zone, the residential oversleeper zone. Dogs are noisy. I don't like dogs. I say we deny. What does the ordinance say?
It says commercial dog kennels are allowed in that zone.
Shall we hear from the public on this one?
No way, Jose.
Then I move we approve with conditions, like measures to keep the noise down.
And the smell.
That's it? Really? Phew. Nice job, you guys. This administrative role is very important, but it is not a core role of the planning commission. Nothing in the state code gives the administrative role to the planning commission. However, if that role is given in the local code, it must be done promptly and diligently and in careful accordance with the law. So that's the planning commission. Their role is to 1, create and recommend changes to the general plan. 2, create and recommend changes to ordinances. And 3, handle assigned administrative matters if delegated to do so by the local code. Well, I hope this clarifies what your planning commission should be doing, their intended role, and how they should spend their time. In my opinion, the best run cities focus on these roles, and they tie together. A good plan leads to good ordinances, and good ordinances lead to easy and correctly made administrative decisions. And as in all aspects of life, if we focus on what matters most, everything falls into place.
Okay, so something that I said back when we were looking at sections, the 1 through 4 sections of the code, is that it's critical that we get this right now, that the code change, the code amendments, the code revisions that we're doing today are so critical because that's what's going to shape the community for the future. So one way to think about this is if you don't like the form of the community that you live in, if you don't like a decision that's been made administratively, like a site plan or a conditional use permit, that turned out to be a land use decision you felt like was wrong, the place to change that is in the general plan, which will highlight what's that going to be in the future, and then the codes, because developers by right don't build illegal subdivisions. They come in and they comply with the laws that are on your books. So they're doing administrative decision making. So if what you're seeing, what the outcomes are from the codes hitting the ground and development coming out of the ground isn't what you want your community to look like, the place to revise that is in recommendations, code changes to the city council. So just something to think about. If the form of the community that you want is entirely and inherently developed within what the future and the general plan will look like and what the codes say.
Hey, Scott,
Yes, sir.
this is probably more interesting to me than you guys, because you've been doing this for a while. But I'm concerned we don't have that connection between the planning commission and the general plan. And I think, Eric, we need somebody more involvement from the planning commission. I don't know if we've had a chance to get somebody or 2 members on the general plan. But I see we have kind of a disconnect there right now between developing that and making sure that the planning commission has adequate involvement. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, I guess that's what you look at is that general plan steering committee, is doing the legwork with recommendations to our body and probably a little bit more involvement to where the recommendations aren't as cold, we're more involved in helping that along and, with, as it ultimately be our recommendation in the city council.
I think your point's good. Seems like people accept those things they help create. And I think your point of getting hit cold turkey with that may be a little bit more difficult. So I'm open to any suggestions that you may have on how we can get further involvement there.
Well, I'm a little unclear what our role would be. I mean, I thought the general plan was updated once every 10 years in a major overhaul and then a minor overhaul 5 years into that or something like that. Wasn't that? So I kind of thought it was sort of not so much a living document, but something we follow that's out there that we follow when we're applying zones and stuff. I didn't realize we had a lot of input in altering it, or
It's kind of both, and the city has a general plan advisory committee for whatever reason. Maybe there was a lot of citizen involvement, maybe there's been. It was a good way to include the community in the decision-making for the moderate income housing plan. And I don't think that it's a bad way to go. I think that it's really just a decision-making that's seated with you. That you could be the general plan advisory steering committee, and we could carve out a section of each meeting to talk about that as it marches forward to adoption, and really probably should, because that's one of the most important decision-making aspects. So I think if we can appoint, to the mayor's comment, 1 or 2 planning commission members who attend that second meeting a month, which is the 4th Wednesday of each month for the general plan advisory committee, then that would at least tie the line more closely between the discussions they're having as a citizen group, making recommendations to the planning commission, who ultimately has to adopt and absorb all of those recommendations, and then forward the plan to the city council for final approval and adoption.
I think this one is really important, Brandon, to your point, because the council has asked that we start vesting zones. And so if that general plan comes and it's accepted by the council, and those zones are pretty much vested, it makes it a little bit more difficult to get a rezone. So I would like to kind of make sure the planning commission has adequate input on that, because that's the ultimate goal. That was one of the things that motivated this review, is because development was moving so quick and there was a lot of down zoning. And so the council said, let's try to get this resolved. But one of the resolutions is to vest zoning as accepted in that general plan.
I don't understand what that means. That's zoning.
That would mean that instead of the general plan saying, in this area somewhere, we're going to allow some density, and then an applicant comes in and they have a rezone and they try to essentially sell you and the city council on why that makes the most sense, as opposed to our future land use map is the zoning map that you will expect in the future. So today you have a piece of property that is agricultural or RE20 for tax purposes. The general plan says that's going to be R18. It's vested. There's going to be no real heavy discussion. The planning commission and city council, the property owner comes in and says, rezone to this thing on the general plan.
Does that hold up in court? It seems like that.
No,
It seems like that holds a
it-
future.
a vesting of a
council.
general plan, and maybe that's partly is, I think, the steering committee, at least my understanding, anyway, vesting of the general plan is simply, hey, this is what it's going to be. It adds one more step to a rezone for the person that wants to rezone. And that step might be, hey, we will only hear rezone applications once a year in this or you have to do a general plan amendment, and then you have to ask for a rezone.
I see.
So there's one more process, but it still doesn't lock it in to say that person, whatever that land is vested that forever. It just adds one more step. Now, a general plan amendment has to be done and granted for the rezone. And both of those are legislative, to where the city council says, no, we don't want it. But it's kind of like when we created the civic zone. We added one more step for the city in order to put something in that zone, because now it goes through an application process versus, just saying, well, the city can put any building anywhere they want. Now it's like, well, no, you have to do it in the civic zone. So now if it's not already that, the city would have to change it, which requires that public hearing for a rezone.
Eric, I think from a substance point, it's going to make it very difficult unless there's a real legitimate legal way to do that, the council would even consider rezoning.
Well, but still, it's only up to the council. If they say, hey, yeah, we'll rezone that, we have to go through this
I'm just
process.
telling you in their mind,
But-
they're saying when that plan is vested, they're not gonna be listening to many rezones. They're gonna, the council right now is saying, when that thing is done and accepted by the council, rezones are gonna be so rare.
Till we have new council members.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, I've
This is what happens
I've
over
developed in
time.
2 cities that had vested vested plans. And that's all it was one more step. They said, well, yes, we'll allow that subdivision there. We're gonna annex that property in the city and we're gonna zone it this. And our general plans vested and that was supposed to be this other city, but we'll take it into our city. So let's go through. And it was, that city did them in the same meeting. General plan amendment, rezone, and the, 2 agenda items. And so it's really that is
It's the council at the time.
to some, yes,
Yeah.
the general plan advisory committee, at least with my involvement in them, some of them feel like we vested, it's locked in for forever. And it's like, that's only one more step for somebody to change their ground. But it is the mental, that mental of, hey, this is what it's supposed to be. Because even us, we went through, when we updated the general plan, which was a heavy update. Was that 13 or was
It
it
was adopted in 15.
15? I mean, it was over a year that we were going through that whole process. And that was the idea then. It's like, hey, we figured this out. We had charrettes with 4 or 5 different times with the public and where should we put that? Where should we put that? And now, and so it's like, yes, we're all going to follow the general plan. And now we have a general plan steering committee that has some different ideas of what some of those things were done simply 5 years ago. And well, let's vest it as this, because this is what we want. And it's like, well, what it is now is what the public wanted 6 years ago. And so that's what's always hard is how long does it really last? And it all, in our city, it all circles around the Washington Boulevard corridor and up the hill, up to Alberta or whatever, that's what is in a cycle of change. Seeming like, no, it's commercial, no, it's multifamily, no, it's single family.
Yeah.
And because I think everybody else is fine to follow the general plan everywhere else in the city of low density residential, but it's that. And so that it's hard because you look at it, say, yes, let's vest the plan, let's lock it in.
Until somebody else has a different
Yeah,
idea.
the next group says, well, we
Or there's a
we
good
decided
development off.
we decided that general plan, now it's half built out. That's too much of this, so let's change it.
Yeah, but it does create a mental barrier and, I mean, there's obviously a legal hurdle, maybe not a big one, but there's also like a mental barrier and again, it gives some credence to a future, city council that may want to deny it. Because they may want to say, they can fall back on, we follow the vested, right? I mean, they could change it.
Well, like,
just as easily as they could
So
not.
the subdivision that was on Jerry Shaw's property, for you guys, next to the old city public works, that area was designated as medium density townhome stuff in 15 as ideal. Let's grow that. It's walkable to the grocery store. It's all this thing that checks all the boxes.
Yep.
The rezone come in and a few people are like, no, what? And the city council's like, well, we have enough multifamily in the city, so let's leave that as single family stuff. And it got denied when it was following the general plan. And it looks like the updated general plan, it will still be that same medium density stuff. And so that night, their opinion was, and unfortunately, sometimes it's who comes to the meeting and expresses their opinion.
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden, something gets changed.
And one thing I would say about our current general plan is it's not very specific. The
Yeah,
best example is single family low density is everything from R15 to RE20. And so that's one of the tasks that the general plan is working on is actually saying the density for this area will be R15. Because then in theory, if it's done right, then when someone comes in for a project, it's not, well, it could be 8 units to the acre or 18. It's going to be very clear, like this is an 8 unit to the acre piece. And the one
Yeah.
next to it that's between here and Smith's, that's an 18 units
Yeah,
an acre.
that's
So,
the clarity that's
yeah.
So they're just trying to tighten up the general plan,
right.
so it's a lot more clear on here's what it is, it's not nebulous.
And I would also say that the other goal from a staff perspective is to make sure that the general plan is reflecting what the residents want and not necessarily what the consultants thought was the best approach.
Yeah.
And I say that because the consultants oftentimes carry such a heavy hand when they say, here's what you should do. And then basically say, tell me why we shouldn't. And people don't have they're not empowered in those meetings to say that's a terrible idea because the consultant is the all-knowing individual in the room, so to speak. So in this case, staff is helping with recommendations, but it's a very slow and thought. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the right word, like just, it's a very involved process that we're going through, which is why it's taking a long time.
That's okay.
Mhm.
You put that much thought into that's okay, because you're avoiding a lot of problems later. Like just, well, we're going to do this, what the heck? We're tired of doing it.
And there were communities that had general plans that were and not very many anymore, but when I was in Davis County, one of the cities in Davis County had a general plan that was passed in the early 80s. And they hadn't updated, and that was like from 07 to 13 is when I worked there. So they were making rezoning decisions based on a general plan that didn't even have zoning designations for future land use that were even remotely close to what they were rezoning based on. And so aligning, like North Ogden, while it may feel like, hey, you just did this 6 years ago, it's kind of this like steering the ship idea. And we still have a very good general plan that highlights a future land use map for the whole city. So if we do take a little bit of time to get it right, it's not.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, ideally, what would, in the ideal world is you nail down a good general plan and you'd like that to be then land use from there becomes an administrative. It's not, but it's like, you almost want the zoning to be administrative to say, well, the general plan says this. And so, yes, we'll grant it or no, we won't, because we spent the time in the general plan to make it. So, but unfortunately it is the people that sit up in here that are elected that decide, well, I know the general plan says this, but I really like that guy. We'll vote yes, or right, or, we'll vote no. That's what you want to try and be away from, but.
So is it possible to each planning commission meeting, look at a section of the general plan and have some discussion, set a time limit, 10 minutes each meeting, that we're gonna look at something?
You mean
And-
the proposed body of work that's being looked at or the current general plan?
My thought was the current general plan, just for open discussion. If it truly is a living document,
Yeah, well, I think probably what we ought to do is maybe carve that out as an item on each meeting that can be short, or long if we have a short meeting, but really take a snapshot of, hey, this is the area of, whether it's a 1 square mile area or 2 block area that the general plan steering committee say, hey, this is what we're thinking here. We have a discussion on it.
Yeah.
And then, taking that map, in our opinion, in bites and pieces as well. So when it does come before us as an entire map,
yeah,
we've talked about and I say a lot of the areas that, along Washington and there, that really that's getting a lot of the attention because that is the stuff that tends to transition, with zone change. Hey, commercial, residential, high density, what? And
If we do that, you want somebody from the steering committee there.
yeah, I mean, if they're here or even if it's, hopefully one of us involved,
Yeah.
or really just, hey, this is the map and this is the area we're talking about.
it seems to me that, there are issues that come up that are real tactical issues that are reflected in the general plan, whether it's staff or the mayor or, you as our fearless leader here, John,
Yeah.
like throw something, this is the issue on the agenda that we want to have that 10-minute allotted time for the planning commission to just take a look at some evidence and have some public comment and then move on, but it kind of keeps us current on what's going on, if it truly is a living document.
It is up to the point of, once you have that refresh adopted, it's not like you want to keep changing it from there. But to pull it back out every 4 to 5 years and make sure, yeah, this is the direction we're going is extremely helpful.
Well, and even if we're just looking at an issue and just having some public comment, it's not like we're gonna change the general plan. But at least, I think it might even be a way of signaling to the public, like, we're looking at this on an ongoing basis. We're thinking about it. We're not necessarily making any changes to it, but we hear you. And we see that these are really tactical things that are happening, and that's it.
No,
But maybe it's a bad idea. I don't know.
you know, it would be really helpful, though. I'm just trying to think about this. The General Plan Advisory Committee is, in their minds, working really hard to get something to present to the Planning Commission to get adopted by the City Council. It would just seem like to me, if we could get some involvement up front with the Planning Commission with that group, just think how frustrating it would be for them to go through
Yeah.
all of this work and then have a totally different thought process. Planning Commission, that'd be really frustrating to them. I know you guys are all really busy, but if there is a chance we could get one or two involved in that meeting up front to represent the Planning Commission, I think that would fall.
What if we had a work session where they give us a high level overview? Because, I mean, there's a lot of detail they've gone through, obviously, right? And what if, I mean, I can't catch up stuff that I've missed, but what if they gave us a high level overview at this point before they come to us, right? In a work session kind of a thing. And we can say like that, don't like that, or I don't know.
Doesn't hurt.
Throwing it out there.
I think that's a great idea, because I, for one, maybe because I'm new, wouldn't feel as comfortable sitting down and steering the committee. I feel a little bit more comfortable kind of listening to the other members of the commission and weighing in on certain thoughts. So maybe both.
Well, there's no right or wrong answer to some of these things. It's gonna be, their broad stroke things.
Yeah.
You're gonna have an opinion on them. It's just as valid as someone who's not on the planning commission, right? Like,
Yeah.
like their transportation issues, there's gonna be lighting section probably, and, where should commercial be in the city, that kind of stuff.
Okay, so that's great feedback. John and Brandon will all chat about that and discuss what the best way to do that is, but maybe I'll just email you all and see who's willing to or has time that might be able to come in and hang out with the General Plan Advisory Committee.
How much longer do you think they'll be working on it? Is it quite a bit longer before
Well,
they?
I'm kind of in the same position as you guys are, that being here for 3 months, not even yet, so August 10th will be 3 months. I'm still trying to catch up on the work that they've done to date and what we do as staff, because there's been they've gone a lot of different directions, so they've done work and they've kind of focused on different pieces and elements, but right now in my mind, I don't have this is the cohesive presentation I would make to the Planning Commission of the collective work of the General Plan Advisory Committee.
Yeah.
And that may just be my unknowing with how far they are, but
They could present stuff that they've debated, right? They don't have to have a concrete answer on stuff, but they could say, hey, we wrestled with this area, maybe, and we've thought about this, we've thought about that, and we've gone this way, we've gone that way, and then they could maybe get some input from it.
I guess I'm just gonna speak straight. I'm like, what's going through my mind, thinking, yeah, I could do that, but I'm putting myself in that room, right? And now I'm either with them or I'm not with them. And I'm either, later it's gonna come back like, wow, Commissioner Nancaro, she said you guys were all on board with you. You know what I mean? I'm just kind of like,
It doesn't-
I
but it
don't know
doesn't
about
have to be
this.
that
I don't know
way.
about
I mean,
this whole situation.
I'm on the committee. I've probably missed the last 3 or 4 meetings. And
I'm
but-
trying to just.
But
think
like
of
I've
what
had
would the dynamic,
opposing opinions with them a
Mhm.
lot of different times. And
Yeah.
to begin with, they got in and as the committee kind of felt like it was their decision and it was
Yeah,
done.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
what they said went. And I'm like, hey guys, we're recommending, to the point where they're like, we're gonna do a moratorium on the city for rezone anything till we get this done. And they said, we're gonna have this done in 6 months. And that was a year ago.
Yeah, I don't
And
see
so
I'm a
they've
little
learned a
uncomfortable
lot.
placing myself.
But
in
they've
this
learned a
group.
lot, they've really learned a lot of how things change and now, and they've kind of realized, oh, this is,
Yeah.
you know, just, I mean, there was several conversations about everybody was in love with the conservation area or
Right.
development rights. Hey, this area is gonna be conservation. That will be great. Okay, now what area do you want to have that accepts those development rights from that ground? Now where's the accepting zone? Well, we don't want to add any density anywhere else. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's the tough thing of the give and take.
I
And
think that's the important thing is you were there to kind of give us some guidance what they could do.
Yeah.
yeah,
And not do. But I think from my observation, there hasn't been animosity in this, been kind of.
no, yeah.
Right.
It's everybody's converse well. It's not, there isn't anybody one against another.
Right, but I don't want to be like, well, you know, Commissioner Nanker was there, so everybody's on board with this because she represents the commission. You know what I mean? And I don't want to get
Councilman Barker's
involved
on
in
the
that.
committee.
That's hard to always, when they ask us to come to planning to the city council,
Mhm.
you know, I'm like, hey, I'm giving a pretty biased, like, you know, feedback
Yeah,
of what,
yeah,
what
yeah.
we all talked about. We're
Mhm.
seven, how many people are there? Seven, six people? And I've come to the city council and been like, well, in my opinion, you know, and you are walking a
Yeah,
tightrope
yeah.
a little bit.
Where we use that, we say, well, Commissioner Thomas said.
Yeah.
Your name will
Exactly.
get drugged through the.
Yeah,
mud.
So-
exactly.
Right.
We did commit to an hour, but one of the co-chairs of that committee is listening and
Mhm.
probably would have feedback for this group.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you'd be interested in that.
Just see if
Sure.
she was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Steph is on. Is that,
Yes. So we
they've
should
done,
be
they've
able
done a
to,
great job.
Hi, guys.
All
Can you
right.
hear me?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm listening to you guys talk about the general plan advisory committee, and I appreciate the discussion and stuff. I'm a little bit frustrated at some of the things I'm hearing and a little bit of the portrayal, which is fine because Eric has, you know, been the only one that I've seen at our committee meetings as a member, except for the last 3 months. So, I mean, I would start by welcoming any of you guys to join our committee meetings, listen in, give us comments and help us to understand where you're coming from, some of the ideas you have. It did take us a little bit to get our feet on the ground and understand exactly what our role was, and to make sure everyone's was heard in what they had, their ideas. And we've come together really well, and we talked about conservation area, absolutely. And, you know, and then it moves on to what does that look like and how do we make that work for developers and the community. So, you know, when you put a group together that are new at this, that don't understand, it takes a little bit to figure it out. We want to do it right. The moratorium, I believe, was Councilman Swanson's idea. So I don't think we were all like, let's just stop building until we do this. I think there were some concerns that everyone had about a lot of zoning changes happening. I'm really proud of the committee and where we've come to. There are a lot of voices, there are a lot of ideas, and we've done really well at working through those and finding some ideas that meet the needs and hit all of those ideas and a lot of the ideas and concerns we're hearing from the community as well. Anyway, that's just my thoughts listening, but I mean, any input would be great. You guys certainly know more about planning, and that will help us to understand. The last meeting we had with Scott, I mean, like, the more we understand and the more we know, the easier it is for us to make those decisions and feel like we're making the right decisions and move forward. To the credit of everyone that I work with, I feel like we are not going to make a decision unless we fully understand it and you know, stand behind that recommendation that we would be giving.
So Steph, what do you think about the idea that when we threw out there that we had a work session, you guys kind of gave us a high level overview? Because I mean, I think you guys are probably have done a great job, but I don't know any of the details of what you guys have wrestled with. Well, I mean,
yeah, and I would love that. I think that would be a great idea. I would love for you guys to know what we're looking at, and any of your input and knowledge
So.
Like,
would
I think
go
that
into
would be
a- so,
really,
Well, what I was talking about was kind of a presentation midway through your work, right? So you wouldn't give us a finished product. This would be a, hey, here's our rough draft of this. Are we going in the right direction? That kind of a thing.
yeah, I think that would be great. The one thing, I think what takes us a little bit of time is, again, we're all still pretty new to this. And so when we feel like we understand something and we get, oh, this is what we need. This is what we need. Exactly. We jump right on it and we can get a lot done. But it really is getting our footing and understanding it. You guys have so much knowledge that any input or direction would be welcomed and appreciated. Because we know it's taking us a long time, and we too are a little bit frustrated when we talk about something, but we don't quite have an understanding. And so then it takes us a little bit time to get that understanding down, and it puts decisions a little bit back while we're trying to learn as we go. So does that help any of you guys understand kind of where we're at? But we definitely have been able to go through the city. We haven't, we've got some zones that we're working on. We're just working on more of the final detail and some of the overlay zones.
Being that I haven't been there the last few months, would it be something that you would have an update that if we, on our side, we're able to commit to say, hey, let's have this August General Plan Steering Committee be combined with Planning Commission. That puts us an extra meeting this month, but you can kind of give us that presentation.
I think that would be great.
That.
I think our entire committee would love to say, this is where we're at, guys. These are kind of the ideas we have. We're learning how, what zones work best based on our overlay, what we've got planned. And, some of the ideas that Scott has brought and taught us. Well, that sounds really weird, but do you know what I'm saying? The ideas that the tools that Scott has introduced us to, and that we're learning. I think that there's a lot of excitement around that, and we can finally see some ways to get to some of the problems we were stuck on. Like, how do we do this? How do we make this work? How do we conserve this area in a way that the community likes, that we feel is right, but also possibly, develop and give the developer? How do we preserve these areas that we think are important and that we're hearing are important to the community, but also allow the developer those land rights to develop his land? So.
Yeah, that's the hard thing always, right? You want to figure out what to do with a piece of ground, and in the meantime, you figure out that an application comes in to change it.
Yes, and we know that. We totally know that. And it's so, but again, most of us are coming in with ideas, but not really the tools to, we don't know how to implement it or how to lay it out. But we do now. I'm just saying it's been a little bit of a learning curve. And listening to tonight's meeting was sure that was a great video. I learned a lot.
Well, stay tuned. We got one more. We'll do that. We'll talk about that here at the end of the meeting if we can make that schedule work for the end of the month.
Yeah, and that would be great.
Do you want to see the third video? It's just
We have to do 4 hours. I'm counting this an hour and a half.
Yeah, we've clicked over 1 hour. That counts as 2.
I just like it when he said, if you want to do the right thing unless you're evil. That was like Daymaker.
I'm game. They were short videos and they've been good. So, yeah.
I don't know what's on the Olympics tonight, so we'll keep going.
Coronation, the public have come to planning commission meeting. Yes, and they want to speak. We must flee. there, part 3. I am Brent Bateman, the State Property Rights Ombudsman. If you're watching this video and you have not watched part 1, the difference between legislative, administrative, and quasi-judicial decisions, and watched part 2, the Planning Commission, then stop this video right now. Go back and watch those first. That's important. No, go ahead. I'll wait. Okay, fine. Brief recap. In part 1, we talked about how local government officials make either legislative, administrative, or quasi-judicial decisions. A legislative decision makes law. An administrative decision applies the law, and a quasi-judicial decision interprets the law. In part 2, we talked about the role of the Planning Commission and their important legislative role. To study, draft, and recommend to the council a general plan and amendments to ordinances, as well as their occasional administrative role to hear and decide land use applications. Today, in part 3, we will really bring these concepts home. What do they mean, and what role does the public play? How can the public contribute? And in an upcoming video that you can show to the public at the beginning of a public hearing, I will address the public directly. I want to let the public know how they can best contribute to the land use decision-making process. So watch out for that. And again, let's set our quasi-judicial hat aside. It deserves its own video. This discussion will focus primarily on the legislative and administrative decision-making processes. The power of local government to make and enforce land use laws is not inherent. It is specifically delegated to them by the state. Land use power is derived from the police power to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens. The local government has great discretion to decide what it wants its town or county to be, and accordingly, what zoning and land use laws it will adopt. Basically, our system gives a local government some power to tell people what they can or cannot do on their land in the interest of the public good. But in order to do that, the council must formally pass ordinances. This process of passing ordinances is the legislative process. Now, the public's role in the legislative process is huge and absolutely critical. The local legislative body, the city council or county commission, are elected by the public to do its work. And they should listen to the public, tell them what they want their town or county to be. Yep, that means that when a legislative decision is being made, there comes a point where the public has a right to speak. All right, we as the Planning Commission of the beautiful town of Pleasant Vernal, Utah, will now consider whether we should amend our zoning ordinance to allow a pet crematorium in our very quietest and best smelling residential zone. We will now open the floor to public comment.
I am in favor. I am sick and tired of my neighbor throwing her dead pets into my yard.
I am opposed to this proposal. New pet crematoriums will unfairly compete with my old pet crematorium 2 blocks down the road.
If this wasn't something we all wanted, why did they name the road Roasted Cat Street? And for the record, it was just the one cat that one time. Thank you. When are you yahoos gonna fix the potholes over on Wipeout Street?
If you approve this, children will die. Will you please think of the children?
Thank you. This is all great input. Thank you to our wonderful and helpful public. As a planning commissioner or city council person, as long as you are wearing the legislative hat, you can and should consider all of this input when making the decision whether to amend the ordinance. The state law requires that the planning commission hold at least one public hearing where the public is allowed to speak when considering a legislative decision The local codes may require more public hearings than that, such as a city council meeting, and that's fine. The public must be allowed to speak at whatever meeting that you designate a public hearing. And if you are making a legislative decision, you must hold a public hearing at least once. Listen to them, consider what they have to say, and then make your zone change or other legislative decision. What about when we are making an administrative decision? What's the public's role then?
All right, last week, we amended our zoning code to allow pet crematoriums in the SSH1 zone. This week, we have an application from a Mr. Howard Muckbuster who would like to open a pet crematorium in the zone. This is an administrative decision, people.
There's a lot of people here from the public, and I think they want to speak. I don't think they want pet crematoriums here.
State law does not require a public hearing before the administrative decision, only a public meeting.
But does our local ordinance require a public hearing?
Yes, it does.
Okay, let's open it up to the public.
If you approve this, traffic will increase on that street. My kids play on that street. Children will die.
If you approve this, burnt pet hair will be released into the atmosphere. My children breathe that air. Children will die.
If you approve this, pets are going to start mysteriously disappearing. My children love those pets. Children will die. When are you dinglings gonna fix the potholes?
I don't have evidence. I prefer public clamor. Please make your decision based on public clamor. Public clamor. Public clamor. You can't. That's illegal. For this administrative decision, we need evidence, facts, relevant, probative, objective facts that prove or disprove whether or not this application complies with our ordinance.
Clamor, meaning the opinions, fears, and unproven conclusions of the public. That was okay to consider when we were making a legislative decision. That was when we were deciding whether or not to allow pet crematoriums in the area. But we have already decided that now. Now someone has applied, and our job is to decide whether or not their application complies with our ordinance. Because if it does, our answer to them is yes. Administrative decisions must be based on substantial evidence. So, what do we do with all those folks that show up at planning commission meeting, pitchforks and torches in hand, clamoring about an administrative decision? Well, there are some options. Option one, we can decide not to hold public hearings for administrative actions, or at least not to hold public hearings on every administrative action. Option two, if we do hold public hearings on administrative actions, we can make sure we understand the difference between public clamor and evidence. And option three, we can try to educate the public regarding their role on how to best fulfill it. Let them know that clamor is unhelpful at the administrative stage. Let them know that during an administrative decision, evidence, not opinions, is what is needed.
The public's role here is important. In fact, it's critical, but too often is misdirected. As local officials, we want to know what the public thinks and what they want. Their opinions are useful when we are making a legislative decision. But during the administrative process, we are applying, not making the law. Although this seems most often when the public shows up and has the most to say, this is the time to distinguish between evidence and public clamor. Managing this process and avoiding making administrative decisions based on public clamor is one of the best ways to make a correct and legally supportable decision.
Okay, so I have two questions. One is, and this isn't a trick question, I know that the code is new for the reorganization, but There's an example of an administrative decision that's been removed from the planning commission and given to staff. Can you think of what that administrative decision was in the code reorganization?
Minor subdivisions?
Final approval for someone.
Correct, yeah, so final plat approval for subdivisions. Preliminary approvals would come in, preliminary plat approved, with the planning commission. Your role to make sure that we have administered as staff all of the ordinances correctly against that subdivision. And then substantial compliance, conformance with that preliminary plat comes in, and that would be an administrative decision. So no more, it'd be one fewer meeting for you. And then the other question that we talked about, Brandon and I, before this meeting, let me make sure I read it right, is tell us about a time or talk about a time on the planning commission when you either felt the pressure of public clamor or how the public's input had affected the way you've made a decision. And we don't have to make this really long, but I'm just interested to know if that's something you've dealt with in your time on the planning commission. And so, yeah, go ahead.
I can think of many times, and you know, I always sit there and think that usually a negative emotion draws more people out than a positive thing. And I'm not going to use one of our planning commission things as an example, but I'll use something the city council wrestles with, like the pond that they wanted to build down. And we've talked about that too. Well, I feel like people come out largely against it, and the people in the room are 75% against this pond. But I feel like 75% of the city is in favor of it. But I think the negative emotion draws more action than the positive emotion. And so I sit there and wrestle with that, thinking like, you know, I think 15,000 people in the city probably want this, and 4,000 hate it. But who's in the room, right? 4,000 people. And so it's really hard sometimes with those kind of things to sit there and tell, because from their perception, they're the city, right? And you know, I struggle with that, with how to, you know, walk the line there, because the people who show up are generally energized because of that negative emotion. It affects them personally, or they're very much against it, or they think it's a safety issue, or something like that, right? And
You know, I'm just gonna refer to our last meeting. You know, when I read the staff report before the meeting, you know, they had this, they wanted to develop this pretty rundown looking lot into this beautiful rendition of 6 townhomes or something like that. I thought, well, that looks pretty nice, you know, I could picture that across from the park. And then the people, all of the neighbors, I said, well, okay, what if I was the person that just built that house across the street? What if I was that guy that lived right behind who's, you know, it just didn't fit there. And that completely swayed my opinion to something completely different.
yeah, I changed my mind many times.
Yeah,
I review the packet before I come to the meeting almost all the time.
You think,
And
well,
you kind of get you thinking one way. And I've been surprised that I've walked out of here feeling completely different than I've been surprised.
Based completely on what the
Yeah.
testimony was.
Yeah.
from-
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wanted to compliment you on that. As I listened, I thought the initial reaction was going to be rezoning. But I think when the citizens stood up and said, that 10-plex is there, because the initial discussion was, well, there's already 10-plex there, this kind of fits in. But when they started talking about how that got approved and why it was there, all of a sudden things started changing. Well, yeah, probably that 10-plex shouldn't have been there, right? So why would we compound the problem?
Right.
But I was going to bring that up and compliment you, because I think you did listen very carefully. It wasn't just clowning, basically. It was, I talked to John after the meeting. I said, how'd that 10-plex get there? And it's quite an interesting discussion on how it got there. So I just wanted to compliment you on that. The fact you did listen very carefully. And what I thought was a decision to rezone all of a sudden. Carefully changed.
That 10-plex really complicated things, because that almost gave. I was against that for that zone when I read it, and then when I learned that there was a 10-plex there, I thought, how do we transition?
Like the whole block,
right?
Yeah,
because that's there, it's not going anywhere. And so now, who's going to want to build a, you know, next to the 10-plex? So
I think, yeah, and I think one thing that actually helps with that, I mean, it's pretty clear that 10-plex never should have gone in. but it's there. The thing that's nice about it that doesn't complicate that area is you kind of have to know it's there because it's sitting in a spot where it's sort of hidden.
Yeah.
So at least it, you know,
It doesn't change the character of the residential neighborhood.
It affects the people that border it.
it
The houses,
really does.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
not across the street, where this
Yeah.
affects the people across the street. And,
yeah.
but, and, you know, I mean, that one there is a prime example when we talk about the general plan. Is that, was it R4 rezone to an R4?
Mhm.
That was in line with what the general plan says should go there.
Mhm.
So if we say, hey, we're vesting the general plan, this is what it is, there's a decision right there saying, oh yeah, that's in line with what everybody's planned for the city. So let's keep going that direction. And so then it changes.
And I think that's a good point for staff. So if our bar we have to hit with these decisions is reasonably debatable, I felt like my staff recommendation was reasonably debatable, if this made sense, but it was really in large part based on the 10-plex, which I didn't have the history on, and then also on the downtown mixed use zone that the general plan has. So in reading what downtown mixed use means in our general plan, it's loose enough that it's reasonably debatable that it means many things. And that would be a clarity that we could make in the general plan that would not necessarily vest a specific zone, but it could vest a number of units or an expectation for the residents within that area for what they could reasonably expect to see as a rezone comes in for any one particular zone, whether it be R15 at nearly 10 units per acre or R4 at 12 units per acre, what those residents could expect.
I think what you just said is a really great example because like on an ongoing basis, it communicates to both the citizens as well as the developers, hey, here's what you can expect here. And it's a lot easier for everyone to kind of swallow, and it's a lot easier for our city to grow in a judicious and organized and fairly rapid way when everyone knows what to
But
expect.
that's, so being on the steering committee, that is the very problem we're talking about is we're talking about a one lot on a block that has 6 parcels on it. Now try and say, okay, what do we want that density to be in that block?
Yep.
And now do that everywhere in the city. So it's gonna
Hard.
take forever to get through the general plan, invest it. And that's why you have broader strokes that saying, hey, this is the general density. And really, I guess maybe easier for me to go through the whole thing and say, yes, this is what you want, but the neighbors don't and do this. We were talking of 1 unit difference in the ability for that lot. Now granted, it's less money to build a 5-plex townhome than it is 2 single-family lots with ADUs on them. But at the same time, your actual density, it was 1 number different. That wasn't much, but that's the hard thing is saying, I still think the R4 is the right zone for that area, just not yet.
Yeah.
Like that is the transition, that is the general plan and saying, yes, that makes sense. But from the neighbors and the way the neighbors are, it might not make sense for 15 more, 20 more years. And so
Not right now.
right now. And so you say, well, and that's the problem is the general plan, you should say the threshold of the general plan is that city build out. Now back off, when is that? 50 years from now, 5 years from now, what is it? And then how do we see things? And that's what's hard because.
Well, the reality is with North Ogden, I mean, just getting practical. We may have thought even 5-6 years ago that it was going to take 50 years or 20 years, but that timeline's accelerating. Even COVID changed that in that people can work from home and maybe it wasn't possible to drive from North Ogden to somewhere in Salt Lake 5 days a week, but it's possible to drive 2 days a week.
That's true.
And people are moving here. I work with people all the time. There's a lot of people in Salt Lake who are looking for a little more space. I get questions asked on a weekly basis. So what's it like up there? I mean, people are looking at our.
Horrible.
Yeah, exactly. The timeline
Better
is
stay in
going
Salt
to
Lake.
get pushed back. Just because of, cost of things here. I mean, the cost is going up and it'll slow it down a little bit, but it's nowhere near the cost it is as you go further south.
So I think your point is right. We had a 10% growth, I think, in the last 10 years since the census. But that has accelerated. The last 2 years, our growth has been 5%. So if you compound that out, it doesn't take you long to get from 22,000 40,000. A lot quicker than I think we anticipated.
Which all the more reason to have a clear plan, because if we don't have that, just get backlogged with, you know.
Well, and
problems.
the key to remember though is we do have a good general plan. And we have good bones.
For sure.
You know, I've developed in a lot of cities that the developers have created the general plan by development and continue to develop the city, and you get mixed, matched, whatever all the way through. And at least we have good bones to build off of.
Yeah.
Any one area in the general plan that's talking about change or adjustment and identifying, it's not like, hey, we're taking this farm ground and turning it into apartments. It's like, hey, you know, that might be the case, but that piece of farm ground has always been planned for that. It's not like it's this massive, oh, we thought that was the 1 acre lot subdivision and it's now all of a sudden apartments. So we have good bones to work with, meaning that's what gives me the comfort in we're growing fast, but let's do it right with the general plan and that. We don't need to hurry and get something out because we have good basis to work off of.
And
as long as the bodies that change the zones understand the bones in the future, they can be guided and directed to make the right decisions as they go, instead of, you know, hey, we can't do anything until we get this, because literally that one block is, should we really mark it as our forum general plan or say, hey, 8 units the acre or whatever. And I know that's been the steering committee's issue to really try and take each thing down, is that's what takes the time. It's not the desire. We'd love to do that through this whole city, but it's okay. We don't have the time to do that everywhere. Where are the hot areas? What are the areas that we see, you know, just like that? Hey, let's focus on Washington Boulevard and downtown and try and figure out what we'd like to see there. And in the process of doing that, we get an application or talks of an application up on the bench of a great big development. It's like, well, wait a minute, we're focusing down here. We didn't know we need to talk about that yet. We thought that was further down the road. And so that's what ends up happening. And like I said, I go back to at least feeling the comfort that we do have good bones in the general plan, to where if something comes in that we're not focusing on yet, at least it can be, you know, it's not going to be out of hand.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I hope that was, you know, interesting and informative for you, and we'll plan another one. I've gotten some resources from Will Summercorn, who's a long-time planner. He also was APA's legislative representative. He shared with me a few PowerPoints, and he said he's also willing to come out and do those presentations as well. So that would be a great, you know, opportunity to hear from somebody who is really well respected and just something different. So we'll schedule these regularly. I'm gonna put that down as an hour and a half, and we have an hour that's been done for everybody but Eric and Nicole. And so I'll send you guys a link, and then we'll just track these and start over on December or January 1 too. So
And I'll just bring up a point with, it's good to see who Brent Bateman was. I've had to contact his office before. And as an example of when you say administrative decision or legislative, I had a project in a city that the administrative body and legislative body was the same. And it came down to a decision that was made on the use of the ground that didn't need to be rezoned, but then the allowed use wasn't allowed. To give you an example, in this was a commercial zone, and in the description of the zone, it said no commercial vehicles allowed. So they denied the use because the entity that wanted to go there had commercial vehicles. But it was a commercial zone, and any vehicle that goes, you know, in a commercial building that has to do with the business would be considered that. And, you know, contacting the property rights ombudsman, he says, well, unfortunately, he's like, I have to uphold the city's law, which says this is the ordinance. Their ordinance is illegal. But so I can't say, well, I can't grant you permission because it goes against the ordinance, and I can't do that, but their ordinance is illegal. So they need to change the ordinance. And the body's like, no, we're not changing it. We're leaving, you know, like you have an illegal law on your books, and, you know, they didn't want to change it because, and going back to another commercial user that was already there, didn't want this user by them, and they were on that person's desire.
The crematorium.
And so they were saying, hey, you're gonna have commercial vehicles at this business, so you can't have that. when every permitted use in the zone would require, could be considered having a commercial vehicle, in the sense that, so it's interesting to see how things play out to where we left it at that. We didn't go to the court. We didn't do any of that stuff to really fight the city rec. You know what, we'll leave it be for now.
I think that brings up a really good point. We want good developers to come here. There are some developers who are better than other developers. And we want to have clarity so that the ones who are good are wanting to come here and do good things. And I know when we're doing that, I think we're doing a really good job of that, but I think we have to always keep that in mind.
And that's, I think, to Eric's point, it's like currently our general plan is broad enough that there is flexibility. Or if we start getting into all these vested every corner of the city of, the more restrictive it is, the more restrictive it's going to be for developers wanting to develop, and the more restrictive for any flexibility on the planning commission or the city council.
And it goes, and it goes both ways. I know when we talked about form-based code, when you have those defined items, sometimes that's attractive to the developer because he knows, hey, if I comply with this, I can do it. Like, I hate developing in cities that the city council is the land use authority, because they treat the administrative decision as though it's legislative, because that's what they're used to. And it's always, I've been in cities where the city attorney has literally told their council, you have to approve this. They meet all the requirements. It's the law. And no, I motion we deny this, and it just because of their feeling of what they want, and so that's frustrating. But when you have those guidelines and saying, hey, yes, this is what you can do, then it attracts those. Because in my experience, and I don't know if you classify bad developers as the ones that come to the meetings with attorneys, but sorry, John, but but really, the big projects, the complex projects that people are willing to spend money and fight on are usually they're enough that they're saying, hey, we'll put the time and effort in fighting this to get our way. When in really, if you can make it a clear path, then they'll be like, oh, they do things right. It's not even worth the fight, so we're not going to do it. And that tends to lean towards and I wouldn't say all developers that come with their attorneys are bad, but because there are councils or commissions that need to understand the law too. And sometimes it's the attorney that has to explain that to them, but.
Yeah, I would think developers talk, I would think it even goes beyond our room to something as simple as like a building inspector. If certain building inspectors in certain parts of the state, you just don't know what to expect with them. I think a developer would think that's a hassle. I don't want to go there.
We'll go to the next
develop in
city.
this city
Yeah.
where I know what to expect.
Yeah, it's always the tough things. I keep using examples, but I got a property rezoned in a city, not ours, that for a project, the city approved, they created an ordinance to make this work because they wanted the project and everything, supposedly. We go in for the rezone, the ordinance gets passed, our project is a drawing in the ordinance as an example. We come to the next meeting the following month for the rezone to meet the general plan amendment that was made with our picture of our project. And then they denied the project because somebody in there, no, we don't want that. And like 2 weeks ago, you just made a general plan amendment for this zone, this piece, and actually this project. Look at your map with it had the roads, everything. And it was just one of those things where, again, that's another city that had the same body that made all those final decisions, but it's like, really? Are you kidding me? And so I think that's what's good is pulling those administrative decisions away from the legislative. And that's why I even like us going to the final plat being with staff, because it's not, we give the public plenty of opportunity to talk even when we don't have to.
Yeah, we really.
And
I see where you're coming from with that. I see your frustration. That would be frustrating if I was doing that professionally, but I think there is we've talked in here before about the tendency to just kind of nod things through because we've talked to a developer for so long, right? And I think John's been pretty clear over the years that, hey, just because this guy's come 12 times and we've guided him a little bit, doesn't shackle us to that project, right? Like we can, they did you dirty, but they were probably justified and do, you know what I'm saying? Like legally they could.
Well, yeah, because the rezone was legislative.
Yeah.
Legally, they can do that. It's just simply, there was zero opposition to the project.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I mean, we had public hearings and everything to go through and make a general. That's why I know the experience of doing a general plan amendment through a vested general plan and all of that, to where it's like, even still, then things change. And it goes both ways. You know, you're saying, hey, we want to have this and making those decisions, but it's really going through the process in the right way. You know, I think some projects we tend to hear the public so much that it's a detriment to the applicant. But in a good way, usually like I say, our applicants, I know Johnny Hansen has made adjustments on his developments because of what public have said in the meetings when he's asking for approval. When in an example is, he could say, this meets the ordinance, I'm not changing it. You have to say yes.
But it creates that dialogue.
Yeah, giving that opportunity. And so.
Any final thoughts from anybody who hasn't had a chance? See, you might look like you have a comment.
Well, it actually is really in line with what Eric was just talking about, but I was thinking, what if somebody comes in and it's in the general plan, like you can have a shed here and this much offset or whatever. But then as the building continues and, you know, you weren't maybe looking into the future as much and there's different topography going on that maybe wasn't thought out. So what if someone comes in and says, hey, I want this permit to put up the shed, but you realize that would be horrible there. So do they just get to do it? Kind of like, well, that was the price tag, you get it for that? Or can you say, you know, give me a month? I mean, because that's frustrating people too, right? But can you kind of rethink it and try to, or it's like,
Utah,
you would think it afterward, let that person do it, think about it afterward and try to change it.
you get the
That's
letter of the
something.
law the day you apply it. So
Okay.
if the ordinance says X and you meet X, then that's what you get. And if we
Okay.
see unintended consequences from the zoning code, you send to the past and you amend it from that point forward.
Okay, that's what I thought.
And you can certainly work with an applicant. If it's like, hey, that's gonna create a 15-foot wall or something, and it's gonna impact your neighbor, would you be willing to consider stepping this back or like limiting or mitigating your
Right.
impacts? But there are times when it's, oh, wow, they can do that, and that is not exactly.
Which is why we need to be so careful.
Yeah.
Like Powder Mountain Town is the prime example of that,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, the state legislature made this law. I don't think they even intended for, maybe they did, I don't know, but they weren't thinking Powder Mountain Town. The people who lived and were impacted by that did not want it, but the applicant applied, it was legal,
Mhm.
Powder Mountain Town, right?
Mhm.
So.
Okay,
No,
anything else?
Okay. Great stuff.
Good
Thank you all.
discussion, you guys.
Yeah. The only motion of the evening is for adjournment. And I need to.
Remarks from planning commission,
Yeah,
we
and
still have
also,
agenda
yeah,
items?
finish.
Yeah, well, any other remarks from planning commissioners? Just the question is, would you guys be able to meet the 25th of this month to do a work session with the steering committee?
Was that a
Yes.
Wednesday?
That's a Wednesday. They meet at 6 o'clock. I'm sure we could ask them 6:30 if that's a.
6:30 is probably better for me.
I can be brief, like I'm somewhere to be early in the morning, so I can't stay too late. but I
Oh,
can
the
be-
following day.
Yeah, the following day, yeah.
Okay,
I have a bunch of stuff I gotta get ready for.
Good for the 25th.
okay, so
Did you say 6 or 6:30?
let's do 6 o'clock.
Okay, I'm a maybe on that, actually. I'm a probably.
Well, we'll nominate you to be on the committee then, if you're not there. Scott, will you maybe send them a
Whoever's in
email?
here is gonna.
Staff, if you're still listening, that will work the 25th, but Scott will send that out. Any other remarks from commissioners? All right, Scott, anything else from you? No. John,
No,
Mayor, All right. Motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor?
Aye.